it. You love it, Dina?
My favorite summer song.
Good song. All right, I hope you're enjoying your summer because it's time now for one more question. Indeed. All right, Instagram question from Mark01221. What is your favorite part about your job at the 5 each day? Or you can say at Fox because many people host other shows as well. Greg, please.
The money.
Money's good.
Good answer.
Money's good.
Good answer.
All right.
I like that it's so unpredictable. So the 5 is not scripted in any way except for what we read at the top. And so you never know what's going to happen. And that's kind of a fun way to come to work every day.
Or how much trouble we're about to get in.
Right. Or how much you might laugh.
That's true, which is a lot. Let's be honest. So, Pete, you're recession-proof. Got a lot of jobs here.
I would say the people. I'm gonna answer for all the viewers out there. They watch you because they love you guys.
We're like
Great
family.
Personalities, great
We're like family to the viewers. I want to make that clear.
Sure.
We are your family.
Listen to us.
I don't know about that.
Geraldo, save everyone.
Well, I like my my first treat of the day, my first cup of coffee, and it's the first cup and
What about
to find
the
out
job?
where I'm going and what I'm going to be doing.
We wonder about that too.
You're so mean. Okay, my favorite part, I have to say, quite honestly, is you guys working with you. I love it. It's the best part, you know, of my day, besides my munchkin in the morning, is coming here and, like, looking at you guys and laughing and feeling that sense of family, because I don't have any family, but you guys are, so it's nice.
You are one of the nicest people ever.
Sweet. Well, it's fun. Isn't it true, though? It's, like, nice. You care about him. Greg, would you like to redo yours? Because it really was subpar.
No. Actually, no, I just look forward to talking. Talking's fun. Getting paid to talk is awesome.
You like your monologue. You like preparing your monologue.
I like just chatting.
You gotta like make people laugh.
Every day is like homeroom.
You know what you like? You like being in the green room and getting your little complaint on
I think what you like the most is when, let's say, somebody else is talking and you have an idea or a point that you want to make, and it's like this spark of excitement. I think that's your favorite.
Yeah, exactly. It's like I suddenly have to run to the bathroom.
You have that little dark cloud over your
Memorial
head.
Day with us. We're going to see you back here tomorrow on the 5 Special Report next.
As President Trump honors the fallen on Memorial Day, efforts continue on the Korean Peninsula to avoid another devastating conflict. It's not even hurricane season officially, but the spring's first named storm is raining on some people's Memorial Day holiday. And are Democrats falling into what some believe is the Tea Party trap? This is Special Report. Good evening. Welcome to Washington. I'm Mike Emanuel in for Bret Baier. President Trump is urging Americans to strive to be worthy of the sacrifice of the country's fallen military heroes. And on this Memorial Day, the president and his team are actively engaged in trying to reduce the chance of war in what could be the world's most dangerous neighborhood. We'll have a report from the Korean Peninsula in a moment. First tonight, correspondent Kevin Cork is at the White House. Good evening, Kevin.
Evening, Mike. A solemn Memorial Day for the president, one punctuated by speeches, songs, and, of course, heartfelt salutes for the folks who paid the ultimate price in serving our country and defending our freedom. It was also a day full of new questions about a brewing spying scandal that threatens to overrun the DOJ and the FBI.
As President Trump.
We are gathered here on the sacred soil of Arlington National Cemetery to honor the lives and deeds of America's greatest heroes, the men and women who laid down their lives for our freedom.
In marking the second Memorial Day of his presidency, President Trump today called on all Americans to never forget the sacrifice of fallen U.S. service members, saying they shared a love more deep and more pure than most will ever know. Among the many veterans in the audience today, 94-year-old Bob Dole, former Kansas senator who spent nearly 4 decades in Congress and was wounded in combat in World War II and received a thunderous ovation from the gathering. But while the president spent this Memorial Day honoring the memories of the fallen, both on hallowed ground and online, he began it by focusing his attention to a discussion on Fox News on so-called Spygate and the idea that the FBI placed an informant into or around the Trump campaign during and after the 2016 election. On Twitter, Mr. Trump quoted constitutional legal scholar Jonathan Turley, who told Fox that the president deserves some answers. Said of ousted acting AG Sally Yates, "I find her actions to be really quite unbelievable." And said if the Obama administration put the opposing campaign's presidential candidate or his campaign under investigation, that raises legitimate questions, adding, "It goes to the heart of our electoral system."
We should get everyone involved in, get them on the record, and get that record to the public, because at some point we're going to have to come back together as a country. This division is getting deeper, and it's because politicians on both sides are playing games with these investigations.
While New York Democratic Senator Chuck Schumer noted in a tweet the Mueller investigation's 19 indictments and 3 guilty pleas, he failed to mention that there's been no evidence of Russian collusion uncovered by the special counsel, who may not, if the president's lawyers have their way, get an opportunity to interview the president in the Russia probe.
And the reality is, we're not going to sit him down if this is a trap for perjury, and until we're convinced of that. And if they don't show us these documents, well, we just going to have to say no.
Giuliani says the president insists he wants to sit down with the special counsel. In fact, he said as much on the record, Mike, but it's also important to point out that his lawyers, at least for now, are advising against it. Mike?
Kevin Cork leading us off on the North Lawn. Kevin, many thanks. A U.S. team is on the ground tonight in the Korean Peninsula. Further evidence that the summit between President Trump and Kim Jong-un may in fact happen. Senior Foreign Affairs correspondent Greg Palcott is in Seoul tonight.
A whirlwind of activity ahead of the planned summit involving President Trump and North Korean leader Kim Jong-un. At the scene of Saturday's surprise summit with Kim and South Korean President Moon Jae-in on the North Korean side of the DMZ, U.S. and North Korean teams are working out the details of the possible meeting.
I think the U.S. is trying to gauge North Korea's interest in denuclearization and what that might mean, how far they're willing to go.
Heading up the high-powered American side, U.S. Ambassador to the Philippines, former Ambassador to South Korea, and Korea nuclear negotiator Sung Kim. Director of Korean Affairs at the National Security Council, Allison Hooker, who accompanied Ivanka Trump to the South Korean Olympics in February. And Assistant Secretary of Defense for Asia, Randall Shriver, who was with Secretary of State Mike Pompeo on his last trip to Pyongyang. They are facing off against powerful North Korean Vice Foreign Minister Cho Sun-hui, whose explosive remarks last week threatening a nuclear-to-nuclear showdown and calling Vice President Pence a political dummy almost blew the summit out of the water. Also set to meet in Singapore, the possible venue of the summit, White House Deputy Chief of Staff Joe Hagan and others who, with their North Korean counterparts, will plan logistics for the meeting. With more North-South inter-Korean talks planned, South Korean President Moon called Monday for even more dialogue, possibly a three-way summit with the U.S. and the North after Singapore.
I think one thing that President Moon was trying to do was to restore the communication channels.
Talks between U.S. and North Korean negotiators are set to continue here through Tuesday. And there's even talk of one last meeting between Secretary of State Pompeo and a North Korean official to give the final go-ahead to the summit if all goes well. Mike.
Greg Palcott in Seoul. Greg, thanks a lot. The European Union's foreign policy chief says EU members are committed to keeping their end of the nuclear deal with Iran. The U.S. pulled out of the pact earlier this month and is threatening to punish countries that do business with Tehran. The EU says it is intensely coordinating efforts to protect members' economic investments in Iran. Former President George H.W. Bush is spending his Memorial Day in a hospital in Maine. He was brought in Sunday after experiencing low blood pressure and fatigue. A spokesman says the 93-year-old Mr. Bush is awake, alert, and not in any discomfort, but is expected to spend at least a few days in the hospital for observation. The 41st president was last hospitalized in late April following the passing of his wife. Subtropical storm Alberto is getting a jump on the hurricane season tonight. The storm is moving through the northern Gulf Coast, sending many holiday travelers scurrying from the Florida Panhandle beaches. Correspondent Phil Keating is in Panama City Beach tonight. Good evening, Phil.
Good evening, Mike. The center of this subtropical storm, Alberto, is making landfall as we speak, just about 10 miles up the beach from where we are here in Bay County, Florida. That's up there in Laguna Beach. And you can see the scenes of people. This is about the most crowded we've seen it all day, simply because the rain has finally stopped, but the wind remains very strong and sand is blasting everybody who's out here. The surf remains a severe risk to life because of the rip currents, and tens of millions of dollars have been lost in tourism revenue that just blew away. Holiday anticipation of the worst kind as residents of the Gulf Coast brace for the full force of subtropical storm Alberto.
No sun here.
The National Weather Service says the storm's center was maintaining its strength as it churns to landfall here on the Florida Panhandle, with maximum sustained winds approaching 70 miles per hour. 2 million Americans now under a tropical storm warning. Forecasters say get ready for life-threatening surf conditions, heavy rains, and flooding, even tornadoes.
I've talked to sheriffs in the Panhandle. They're ready. We're constantly having updates. So I think everybody's ready for this.
The Gulf beaches this holiday weekend mostly empty. The few visitors trying to enjoy the last peaks of sun and expressing caution.
Very, very windy. It's kind of scary. The undertow appears to be real bad. I'm not letting her get in really over her shins or at least her knees at all.
Lifeguards have now posted double red flags along the shore. Swimming and wading now banned, some choosing to ignore common sense. The Riverside Cafe near Tallahassee is one of many businesses suffering from lack of holiday tourists. A more immediate concern, securing the premises.
We're going to unplug everything that we can unplug. We're going to lift it up the best that we can, and we're just going to let Mother Nature take its course.
A shared sentiment in communities across the region, with residents sandbagging and boarding up homes. It's all just the start of what is predicted to be a busy hurricane season, with 10 to 16 named storms and 5 to 9 hurricanes. Still time to wish on a rainbow for calmer summer skies. Up here on the beach road, this is the view you see. You can see the winds are still very strong, even though, as I mentioned, the rain has stopped for the moment here in Panama City Beach. But look at the road behind me. It's been empty all day, much of the weekend. Everyone's basically just hiding inside their condos and houses. You have sand issues covering the street. So this has been a big day-long event, a true washout for this Memorial Day weekend. Tomorrow, the storm will be dumping more rain in the Tennessee Valley and the Carolinas, and then on Wednesday, expect more of this rain in the Ohio River region. Mike?
Phil Keating on the Florida Gulf Coast. Phil, thanks a lot. The weather is much more destructive so far in Maryland. A flash flood has devastated a part of Ellicott City that was hammered by another storm almost 2 years ago. Correspondent Rich Edson is there tonight.
For the second time in less than 2 years, this is Ellicott City, Maryland.
Well, you always pray that it's not going to happen again. Every time it rains hard, you say a Hail Mary and hope it's not the time. And here we are. It was time.
Rescue crews say they're searching for Edison Herman. Police say he was last seen at a restaurant here on Main Street. Much of that street is now covered in mud or washed away. From beneath this small bridge, crews pulled a dumpster, a tree with roots, and 3 cars. They cleared this field of about a dozen flooded cars. Weather services report about 8 inches of rain fell over a few hours Sunday afternoon. Residents and business owners say the flash flood it created was more destructive than the flood in July 2016. That killed 2 people and caused tens of millions in damage.
We will be stronger in the future. We really will, folks. I mean, this is not a place that gives in. And we didn't give in 2016. We're not going to give in 2018. So I want people to know that Ellicott City is strong, and we're going to continue to be strong.
Maryland Governor Larry Hogan has declared a state of emergency. He had just announced federal funding of more than $1 million to help restore the downtown from the 2016 flood.
So now here we are again. And it's sad, but I said to my husband, is this our new normal? Is this what's normal now? Is for us every couple of years to have to dig this place out?
And Timothy Konjerski said a few weeks ago his brewery had just finished repairs. He says he'll rebuild again.
In the end, you know, our real resources, our people, you know, a building is stone and brick and metal that can be replaced. People can't, and that's the real resource here.
Cleanup crews have been working throughout the day, and that continues. If you see that road right there where those two gentlemen are walking through, that's the main street. That's the main drag here in Ellicott City. Cars have been towed up that street throughout the day. Police say the area to the left and down on the bottom of the hill there, the roadway's all washed out. If you look at the house to the right there, if we were standing there, Mike, 24 hours ago, we'd be completely submerged. And then, of course, there is the missing National Guardsman, the 39-year-old. He's still missing, according to authorities. He was eating dinner about 24 hours ago, 50 yards that way. Mike.
Rich Edson live in Ellicott City, Maryland, with some powerful visuals. Rich, thanks a lot. Up next, are Democrats falling into the Tea Party trap this campaign season? First, here's what some of our Fox affiliates around the country are covering tonight. Fox 28 in Columbus, Ohio, where a 94-year-old World War II veteran is celebrating Memorial Day with a high school diploma. Circleville High School honored Robert Lockhart at its graduation ceremony Sunday. Lockhart would have graduated back in 1944, but he dropped out and joined the Army. He says the diploma means everything to him. Fox 13 in Salt Lake City, as a Utah man and his wife released from captivity in Venezuela, hope to return home tonight. Josh and Tammy Holt arrived back in the U.S. Saturday, flying into Washington's Dulles Airport and then going to the White House to meet President Trump. And this is a live look at Honolulu from Fox 2. One of the big stories there tonight, Hawaii County officials say lava from the Kilauea volcano is covering at least one production well and heading toward another one at a geothermal power plant on the Big Island. The well is plugged, which is supposed to protect against the release of gas that could turn toxic when mixed with lava. That's tonight's live look outside the Beltway from Special Report. We'll be right back. In America's election headquarters on this Memorial Day, a quote often cited in matters of military conflict: those who do not learn from history are doomed to repeat it. Tonight, a political corollary. It has to do with Democrats possibly repeating the mistakes of their Republican rivals and how that could affect the November midterms. Here's correspondent Kristen Fisher.
From Georgia's governor's race,
we are writing the next chapter of Georgia's future,
to the governor's race in Texas,
together we're going to make it happen,
to the congressional contest in Kentucky's 6th district.
Can you believe this?
In race after race, progressive candidates beat out their more moderate opponents in last week's Democratic primaries. It was a win for the party's liberal wing, but some Democrats say those candidates won't stand a chance in the general election. Just like Tea Party conservatives in years past who won the Republican primary but ultimately lost against a Democrat. Think Todd Akin, the pro-life Senate candidate from Missouri, who once said,
if it's a legitimate rape, the female body has ways to try to shut that whole thing down.
Or how about Richard Murdoch, who ran for Senate in Indiana and described pregnancy from rape as
something that God intended to happen.
Now, many Democratic strategists worry that these midterms could be their Tea Party moment.
Democrats are deeply worried that their best chance since 2010 to take the House could be evaporating.
Not every strategist sees it that way.
I'm a little baffled by the left is winning narrative that is out there right now. I believe what's happened in this election is that the quiet voice in the middle has come back with a vengeance.
But Doug Schoen says what those strategists are saying publicly and what they're thinking privately are two different things.
Look at the data, look at the numbers, and most of all, look at the real panic that is going on among Democrats. Talking points are one thing, the statistical truth quite another.
His prescription for the party with 6 months to go?
Unify, develop a moderate agenda that emphasizes growth and opportunity, downplay impeachment, find another leader other than Nancy Pelosi, and talk about how we can build an alternative version of America than that the Trump Republican coalition has offered.
The next big test will be next Tuesday, June 5th, with primaries in 8 states, including California and New Jersey, 2 critical states where Democrats will try to swing seats this November, Mike.
Kristen Fisher live here in Washington. Kristen, thanks a lot. While we're dusting off old quotes tonight, here's another. Money is the lifeblood of politics. And that leads us to correspondent Peter Ducey's look at where the two parties stand financially as we head into the summer campaign season.
As Democrats try to mount a blue wave, some Republican strategists are dealing with a red alert. That's because committees dedicated to helping Democrats flip control of the House and Senate have now outraised Republican committees dedicated to keeping control. And even though there are fewer Democratic Senate hopefuls, their campaigns are raking in more than Republicans. Same story in House races, where the National Republican Congressional Committee is emailing supporters to donate, quote, to show Nancy Pelosi we won't go down without a fight. But the GOP knows it's a long time till November.
Money's like horseshoes and hand grenades. You don't need to have the most. You just got to be close. And that deficit that we have in cash on hand is going to be erased because the DCCC is spending $3 million at least in California in advance of the primary just to get a single Democrat through into the general.
A bright spot for the right. The RNC has raised almost double the DNC's total. That's a deficit the DNC dismisses.
The RNC has always outraised our party. And so when we think about the opportunities that exist, it's about being clear. How do we find more ways to mobilize itself? The Republicans outraised us 2-1 in 2005, 2006, and yet we still took back the House.
Outside money is also pouring into these midterms. From the right, with the Congressional Leadership Fund pledging $48 million worth of ads in the general election, and from the left, with liberal billionaire Tom Steyer's Next Gen America pumping in $30 million. Steyer spent last year campaigning to remove President Trump from office.
A Republican Congress once impeached a president for far less.
The ads have evolved to become more midterm specific, but analysts believe Steyer is buying just to have one of his spots pop up on TV at the White House, Mar-a-Lago, or wherever else the president may be tuned in.
The thing that he wants the most in the whole world is for Donald Trump to tweet at him and make him, Tom Steyer, the voice and the vision of the opposition.
Right around the same time that Democrats took the lead in money raised, Republicans started erasing the Democratic lead in voter preference. And now the GOP is within the margin of error in gold standard polls. Mike?
Our Peter Ducey following the money. Peter, thanks a lot. The Indiana teacher who tackled an armed student during Friday's shooting at a suburban Indianapolis middle school says he wants the focus to be on a 13-year-old girl who was seriously injured. Jason Seaman says Ella Whistler's courage is nothing short of remarkable. Seaman was also shot but not hurt badly and is out of the hospital.
As a person who isn't looking for attention nor entirely comfortable with the situation I'm currently in, I want to make it clear that my actions on that day, in my mind, were the only acceptable actions I could have done given the circumstances. I deeply care for my students and their well-being, so that is why I did what I did that day.
Quite a hero. The suspect in the shooting, believed to be a 7th grader, is in custody. France's president says a migrant who scaled an apartment building to save a young child dangling from a balcony is a hero. Emmanuel Macron is rewarding the 22-year-old man with a French nationality and a job as a firefighter. The man's feat went viral on social media, where he was dubbed Spider-Man for climbing up 5 floors from balcony to balcony and whisking a 4-year-old boy to safety Saturday night as a crowd screamed at the foot of the building. When we come back, the Air Force tries to secure the Medal of Honor for one of its fallen heroes. On this Memorial Day, an effort is underway to have the nation's highest military award bestowed on an Air Force sergeant killed in a controversial operation in Afghanistan 16 years ago. National Security Correspondent Jennifer Griffin has the story from the Pentagon.
At a Medal of Honor ceremony last week, the president honored Navy SEAL Bret Slavinsky for his actions in Afghanistan shortly after 9/11, a failed attempt to set up an observation post nearly 11,000 feet above sea level over an area where al-Qaeda fighters were operating. Air Force Tech Sergeant John Chapman was among the 7 U.S. service members killed that day after a series of mistakes on what is now known as Roberts Ridge. Chapman was shot returning to find Navy SEAL Neil Roberts, who slipped and fell out of their helicopter. Initially thought to have been fatally injured, Chapman was left by the retreating SEALs, but appeared to fight on alone. The Air Force, which has not received a Medal of Honor since Vietnam, has been pushing to award Chapman the nation's highest medal for valor.
We know now from those Predator feeds that John Chapman was not dead, that he got back up, he kept fighting, he killed additional enemy forces.
For years, former Air Force Secretary Deborah James pushed for Chapman's Air Force Cross to be upgraded.
He paved the way for the safe entry of the reinforcing forces that were coming in to follow on to the battle.
New evidence, the result of improved technology and analysis of images fed back from a drone flying above the attack site, suggests that Chapman fought on for more than an hour after the SEALs left him. The Air Force does not blame team leader Bret Slabinski.
I think he did his absolute level best on the worst day of his life.
Former Army Delta Force operator Jim Reese was in the Operations Center in Afghanistan watching the video live.
Being privy to those feeds that I was privy to during the operation that night, seeing someone shooting when those Rangers were coming in, yes, I believe Chapman was alive.
The SEALs say they did not know Chapman was alive when they retreated.
I do believe Chappie was fighting up there. His resiliency, you know, he probably passed out initially, came back up. What Chapman did was above and beyond because he was the last one on that mountain. So, you know, as we say, though I be the lone survivor.
At the Pentagon, Jennifer Griffin, Fox News.
A California family is resting a bit easier this holiday thanks to a group of researchers who've made an amazing discovery concerning a relative who died in World War II. Correspondent Claudia Cowan has the story from Livermore, California.
These are the fighters of the air fleet. Daily they go up and daily they land.
That was certainly the hope on March 11th, 1944, when Lieutenant Tom Kelly was on a bombing raid over Papua New Guinea. But his B-24 bomber was shot down by Japanese anti-aircraft fire and lost in the Pacific for 74 years.
Good copy. We got wreckage and deal.
The bomber's watery grave was recently discovered by Project Recover, a team of military historians and marine scientists who search for the wreckage of combat aircraft and bring closure to the families of Americans listed as missing in action.
I burst into tears. I couldn't believe it.
Diane Christie never met her Uncle Tommy, who was just 21 when he died. But his handwritten letters home are filled with humor and honor. The men fighting here for everyone are doing it for your freedom, he wrote. Years of research by his family, including flight documents and eyewitness accounts, pointed Project Recovery in the right direction. And after an 18-day search, the remarkable discovery
I will read the names that were lost on that day.
Was followed by a gesture of gratitude.
The bomber, Second Lieutenant Thomas V. Kelly. Gunner, Staff Sergeant Donald W. Bird.
When they folded the flag for all 11 crew members and said their name and passed them down, it was just, it was the utmost of respect and honor. We appreciated that so much.
Lieutenant Kelly's family will get one of those flags and now hope military officials will return to the crash site and retrieve any remains so that Lieutenant Kelly can be buried here in Livermore, where he was born and raised. It's a story that could give a lot of hope to the families of more than 72,000 MIAs from World War II. Mike.
Claudia Cowan, thanks very much. Up next, the panel on the president's efforts to resurrect the North Korea summit. First, beyond our borders tonight. Not everyone in Ireland is celebrating the referendum to repeal the nation's strict abortion ban. Many Sunday worshipers said the move reflects a weakening of the Catholic Church's historic influence and fills them with dread for the country's future. The referendum won by a 2-to-1 margin. Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas is out of the hospital tonight. He was discharged from a West Bank facility today, ending a week-long stay that drew attention to the 83-year-old's long history of health problems and his refusal to name a deputy or successor. Poland's defense minister says he has held talks with U.S. officials about having thousands of American troops permanently stationed there as a deterrent to Russia. Poland is concerned for its own and the region's security after Russia's annexation of the Crimean Peninsula, its support for separatists in eastern Ukraine, and other steps seen as hostile. Just some of the other stories beyond our borders tonight. We'll be right back.
I just want to mention we're doing very well in terms of the summit with North Korea. Looks like it's going along very well. As you know, there are meetings going on as we speak in a certain location, which I won't name. We're looking at June 12th in Singapore. That hasn't changed.
I think it's possible to have a constructive and positive summit, and I certainly prefer President Trump's choice now of diplomacy over threatening fire and fury.
I'd love to see them denuclearize. I'm not very optimistic about that.
So the on again, off again, maybe on again North Korea summit. With that, let's bring in our panel. Tom Rogan, commentary writer for the Washington Examiner. Karen Tumulty, opinion writer for the Washington Post, and Molly Hemingway, senior editor at The Federalist. Molly, your thoughts on where we are with whether or not this summit's going to happen on or around June 12th?
Well, it would certainly be amazing if we could make that June 12th meeting, in part because we just learned last week that we haven't had a lot of good discussions with North Korea about the terms of what would be discussed at a summit. And there is good reason to be skeptical about North Korea because we have had so many times of meeting with them, of them promising not to proceed with their nuclear ambitions, only to have them break their word. Now that they have finally achieved their long-held goal of nuclearization, I think we have a lot that we need to learn about what they hope to get in exchange for their claim that they will denuclearize.
Speaking of that, we've heard some bipartisan skepticism or concern from lawmakers. Let's take a listen.
It's right out of the North Korean playbook. We're into 3 generations of that playbook now. Act like you want to negotiate, then come up with some outlandish view of what that negotiation means and try to wind up with early benefits to your side and not following through on what you've agreed to do.
Twice before, North Korea, under Kim Jong-un's father, committed to full denuclearization in 6-party talks in 2005 and 2007, as Senator Blunt just referenced, only to then change their tunes.
So while a lot of folks from both parties favor talking, there is at least caution, right, Karen?
I think, too, this go-round, after we saw the president sort of run up to this once before, the way it's going about looks a lot more professional than the first time. The president is actually letting the pros, his foreign policy team, get in there and kind of lay the groundwork. There's a lot more message discipline coming out of this administration. No premature talk of Nobel Prizes this time. And I think also, one of the things that's going to be really important here is kind of setting some realistic expectations for these talks, as opposed to thinking that somehow, you know, by the force of his personality, President Trump can bring about full denuclearization, you know, in his first meeting.
Is the most likely scenario, Tom, they come out of a meeting and say, we've had a good discussion, we've made some steps toward resolving this issue, and now we're going to continue working it? Is that most likely?
I think that's the ideal scenario for the Chinese and the North Koreans, the ideal scenario for President Trump. And I think you see this in terms of how the administration is framing it, is to at least get something immediately out of that summit, whether that be a limited inspections trip by the IAEA into North Korea, whether it be a declaration in terms of the ballistic missile stuff that we know they've been doing on the warhead research, something tangible. And if I think the good thing about this, that skepticism rendering that American expectation of something tangible, means that if you don't get something tangible, then President Trump will go back to the sort of maximum pressure approach, because it will be pretty clear that the North Koreans are doing what they have done before, which is to say playing games.
The South Korean president talked about the message he was delivering over the weekend to the North Koreans. Take a listen to this.
I explained to North Korean leader Kim Jong-un the results of my meeting with U.S. President Trump from last week, and delivered the message that President Trump has a strong will for putting an end to hostile relations and help achieve economic prosperity, provided Chairman Kim makes a decision for complete denuclearization and carries it out.
So there was a lot of speculation this past week that President Moon was coming here and would be taking a message with him. Now it sounds like He did deliver a message, right, Tom?
Yes, I think that's true. I also think the Chinese here, there has been a flip, that the Chinese were trying to test the waters here with President Trump by telling the North Koreans play games. And now that in the context of President Trump playing hardball with them on trade, they want U.S. concessions in the South China Sea as part of their quid pro quo for pressuring Pyongyang. President Trump is playing that game of unpredictability. I mean, this is the one issue I do think where the Twitter feed and the slight, strangeness of it all serves a positive interest, because it throws foreign nations who have a different political structure to our own off balance in terms of their perception of what Trump might do.
And Karen, we know an advance team from the U.S. went to North Korea to meet to talk about this, so it sounds like they're hopeful.
And again, like I said, they're sending the pros in to lay the groundwork. But I think President Moon has been, in a lot of ways, the most interesting person to watch in all of this. He does seem to be kind of the most skillful at kind of reading all the interests and sort of bringing everybody along.
Molly, how do you think the next couple of weeks play out with this?
Well, I'm not sure, but I just want to say I think it's also worth pointing out that it wasn't that the U.S. was not eager to meet, or that the U.S. wasn't trying to make terms for what the summit would be, but that North Korea wasn't showing up to these.
But it was also the president sort of getting out of his own foreign policy team. In fact, by announcing this meeting before he even discussed with his own foreign policy team what he was going to do, that really did kind of limit the amount of groundwork that could be done.
Whether you think it's limiting or whether you think that kind of pressure is actually helpful. I mean, you're seeing also South Korea is putting a lot of pressure on people. They're very eager to move things forward. And you're seeing this. I mean, I think even in President Trump's letter last week, you got a sense he said something like, we were told by South Korea that you wanted to meet. We were told by South Korea that North Korea wanted to meet. He kind of suggested that maybe they weren't confident in what South Korea was saying. There has been so much that has been communicated through South Korea. And even today, they're showing such eagerness. I think that's interesting. This is clearly in their interest to get a deal going. Sure. Also, President Trump talked with Abe today. Japan is very interested in getting things going. China, as Tom points out, I think is the interesting party here. We're not going to get a deal unless they're on board. I don't think we've learned a lot or enough yet about what their interests are or what they hope to accomplish.
Now, I want to quickly switch gears for a moment. I made reference to former President Bush, 41, George Herbert Walker Bush, being in the hospital. He tweeted earlier this hour, and I thought I'd bring our audience up to date on what he's tweeting. Very much regret missing the Memorial Day parade today in Kennebunkport, and forever grateful not only to those patriots who made the ultimate sacrifice for our nation, but also the Gold Star families whose heritage is imbued with their honor and heroism. And obviously our thoughts and prayers are with him, wishing him a speedy recovery. Next up, President Trump with plenty of new tweets about the Russia investigation.
The whole thing with this investigation that was going on, which we consider spying, was done before Mueller got involved. But it completely taints his investigation.
There is no evidence to support that spy theory.
You can't say you're spying on the Russians if what you're trying to do is to show the Russians are colluding, whatever the hell that means, with the Trump campaign.
It appears that there was an investigation not of the campaign, but of certain individuals who have a history that we should be suspicious of that predate the presidential campaign.
No surprise, plenty of buzz about that over the holiday weekend, and President Trump spent a fair amount of time tweeting about the issue, writing, for example, why didn't the 13 angry Democrats investigate the campaign of crooked Hillary Clinton? Many crimes, much collusion with Russia. Why didn't the FBI take the server from the DNC? Rigged investigation, and here's some of the back and forth on that issue from just yesterday.
This is rigged. I mean, you've got 13 Democrats. You've got a focus on things that didn't happen. No Russia collusion, no obstruction, just defending yourself.
Rudy Giuliani continues to talk about 13 Democrats in a rigged election and a rigged investigation, as he just did on this show. Let me remind you, Robert Mueller, Rod Rosenstein, Chris Wray, this is the special counsel, the FBI director, the deputy attorney general, all lifelong Republicans.
And we're back with our panel, Tom, Karen, and Molly. Molly, your take on the latest back and forth over the Mueller-Russia investigation?
Well, a couple things just from those clips. We keep on hearing about these people being lifelong Republicans, and then when they actually talk, we find out that that is not the whole story. James Comey just wrote a book and went on a media tour begging people to vote for Democrats. That's a lifelong Republican. Maybe Republican versus Democrat isn't the best way to view this so much as establishment versus outsider. And Marco Rubio apparently is unaware aware that the FBI opened an investigation into the Trump campaign. He says there's no investigation of the Trump campaign. That's not a secret. They opened an investigation during the campaign. What we have learned in the last week, due to reporting in the Washington Post and New York Times, is that this investigation involved far more surveillance than we ever had any idea about. It wasn't just a wiretap against a campaign aide that was able to, where a wiretap you can look at email communication going back into history and looking at who that person was talking to. It was also national security letters, which are secret subpoenas. And we know of at least one informant, someone secretly gathering information for the government on the Trump campaign. You're supposedly not allowed to call that a spy. I think in the normal world people call that spying. But whatever it is, this is unprecedented. And the lack of journalistic curiosity about what was going on, how this was allowed to happen, and whether protocol was followed is frankly scandalous.
Wait a minute, though, Molly. You just were quoting stories from the Washington Post and then complaining about lack of journalistic.
But the Washington Post, after breaking news that there were spies on the campaign, then runs a bunch of stories saying this isn't spying and this is, we have no idea what Donald Trump is talking about when he's complaining about what was happening in his campaign. They're stepping on their own stories, and you're seeing this in the New York Times and Washington Post and other media outlets acting like it's ridiculous for people to think that this is actually a huge deal, that our government was engaged in this type of surveillance of political opponents, and you're not seeing the level of questioning. When was the last time President Obama was asked, what did he know? When did he find out? What are his thoughts about this?
Well, I do think that Marco Rubio does have a good point, though, which is that ultimately the distinction here, I think, is going to be whether they were investigating a campaign or whether they were investigating a number of individuals on that campaign who we know had a lot of contact with the Russians that may or may not have had anything
the FBI
to do,
already admitted
that
they
may or may
opened up
not have had anything to do with the outcome of the election, but their own various business deals.
Whether the FBI opened up an investigation into the Trump campaign is not in dispute. They have admitted that they have done that, that they had done that. That is not a question. And so this is something that Senator Rubio should know.
Another item that got the president's attention this weekend, got him tweeting about it, was an interview with George Washington University law professor Jonathan Turley. Let's take a listen to him.
We now find out that the Obama administration put the opposing campaign's presidential candidate or his campaign under investigation. That raises legitimate questions. If this was, the Bush administration investigating the Obama campaign, I would think there'd be a lot of Democrats saying, we want to know. And so I just find this really odd.
Tom, your reaction to the professor there?
Well, we do see, all of this now is in the political domain. The idea that the Mueller investigation would be resolved within the traditional sort of legal framework and then gone away, forget it. Both sides here have decided to enter the political fray, the partisan fray, and to double down on that. Certainly on the president's part, there is the strategy there to say whatever happens with Mueller, you cannot trust any of it. But I think it will be interesting to see how some Democrats respond to Horowitz's report, the DOJ Inspector General, when that comes out in the near-term future, because that looks like it's going to be pretty negative in terms of some of the narratives that people like Adam Schiff have presented. So on the president's side there, I think there is a sense of optimism to push the line here and in anticipation of that.
And I guess the question now that came up over the weekend is, will the president sit down with Robert Mueller or not? Here's Rudy Giuliani on that front.
The reality is we're not going to sit him down if this is a trap for perjury. And until we're convinced of that. And if they don't show us these documents, well, we just going to have to say no. Let me emphasize, he wants to explain that he did nothing wrong. It's us, the lawyers, who have to convince him that this is a trap.
Karen, what about the idea of the president sitting down with Mueller and the scope of those kind of conversations?
This is a negotiation, as we saw, for instance, with Bill Clinton in 1998. This is how the process works. And ultimately, for instance, in Bill Clinton's case, they came to an agreement that there would be a time limit on the, on the amount of time he would sit there with them. I think Rudy Giuliani right now is just sort of trying to strengthen his hand in that negotiation.
It's just worth thinking back to where we are from the last year. A year ago, President Trump tweeted that the Obama administration had wiretapped him, and everyone said that this was false and dangerous. And then when it comes out that they weren't just wiretapping at least one person on the campaign, or multiple people actually on the campaign, that they had human intelligence informants working on the campaign, secret subpoenas, then we're told, well, that's not a big deal, that's not a big story, or you're not allowed to be upset about it. We have really moved the goalposts from a year ago when we were told that it would in fact be a horrible thing if there were evidence that there was surveillance of the Trump campaign.
And I guess those close to the president are saying if you're worried about foreign infiltration into a campaign, should you tell the candidate rather than investigating without notifying the candidate, right?
Right, and people are also saying this is standard behavior that you spy on a campaign. Well, I don't think we have any evidence that Hillary Clinton's campaign was spied on or that there were human informants put on her campaign, even though she was one of the victims of Russian meddling. So there's a lot that we have to learn.
All right, panel, thanks very much. When we come back, gone but not forgotten.